Good afternoon. We're live here from the fourth floor conference room at the CPRA building on the water campus in beautiful Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Today's the fourth of 5 Coast Week presentations that we've got. We've got two fantastic speakers today on a great topic. All this excitement building to Coastal Day next week, Monday, March 30th. We've got a number of great events scheduled for Coastal Day. We'll start Monday at 8 o'clock at the LSU Center for River Studies right here on the water campus. We'll have a business event. We call it Coastal Connect. Our partners at CTAC, the Coastal Technical Advisory Committee, and Apex Accelerators will be helping us with the organization of that event. It's an opportunity for businesses to network and engage. There'll be speed dating there, and it's just a wonderful opportunity from 8 to 11. From 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, the action will move downtown to the state capitol. We'll have a briefing in the governor's press room at the capitol. And let me give you a little pro tip. There's some renovations going on at the capitol right now. So the only entry that you're able to access is on the east side of the building. So if you're used to parking on the river side and walking and entering on the west side, that entrance is closed right now. So give yourself a few extra minutes to enter the building if you're going for any of the activities at the state capitol. After that press briefing at 2 o'clock, the activities will move down to the Memorial Hall on the first floor. It'll be an opportunity for visitors to do advocacy with our elected leaders, our legislators, and share with them the importance of our coast and our coastal activities. At 2:30, from 2:30 to 4, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the groups who manage those efforts, they'll be having an open house at the Galvez building in the Oliver Pollock room. So that's 2:30 to 4 at the Galvez building in the Oliver Pollock room. From 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, CPRA will be giving a forecast briefing on construction projects that are going to bid in the next 18 months. That briefing from 3 to 5 will be at the LaSalle building in the LaBelle room. That'll both be in person and it'll have a virtual component as well if you're not able to make it to Baton Rouge or if you want to watch the recording later. At 5 o'clock, all the activities will move to the Pentagon Barracks with a crawfish boil and reception. Everybody will get to break bread and share some time with each other. That event is sponsored by the Coast Builders Coalition and the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. The activities aren't over on the 30th. On Tuesday, the 31st, we do have a partner-led coastal project forecast. So our parishes and levee districts and NGOs who have projects that are going out to bid in the next 18 months, we've got a great lineup. I think 21 projects that'll be going out to bid in the next 18 months by our partners. Go to the next slide. So I just want to reiterate that March 30th from people use the acronym TIG. That's their annual meeting in Baton Rouge. The last few years, we've had virtual meetings. This will be an in-person meeting. And it won't just be the folks from the TIG. It'll also be the folks, representatives from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. That acronym sometimes is NFWF, and also the Restore Council. So all three of the organizations that manage and administer the settlements from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, they'll be there. It'll be open house, so you'll have an opportunity to engage and have any questions answered on projects that have been built or projects that are in the design or construction phase, or even some of the adaptive management projects that have been going on. Next slide. So that's the events next week. This week has been webinars to mainly focus on one of our coastal master plan's objectives. That objective is harnessing natural processes to restore coastal wetlands, and all of the presentations this week have been built on that. If you go to the next slide, we had a fantastic kickoff presentation by Dr. Mike Miner, who talked about those natural processes. And if you missed it, you can go back and watch a recording of that on Vimeo or on our YouTube channel. The presentation's there. We know a number of folks have taken advantage of that. I think more people have watched the recording than watched it live. If you go to the next slide. Tuesday, we had Danielle Ricciardi from our New Orleans field office, who gave a great presentation on the Davis Pond freshwater diversion. Again, presentations are on Vimeo and YouTube. Next slide. Yesterday, Brian Gossman gave a presentation, marvelous presentation on crevasses and land building diversions, and he set the table for our presenters today talking about shreds, sediment retention devices. So those terraces will be the topic of today's presentation. Next slide. So we've got Bern Woods from our Lafayette field office and Natalie Mathern from our New Orleans field office. They'll be giving us our presentation today. And next slide. Tomorrow we'll end up the Coast Week with Elizabeth Gerald from our New Orleans field office and Darren Lee from our Lafayette field office. Elizabeth will talk about hydrologic restoration, some gapping projects that we've done that restore the hydrologic processes. And Darren Lee will give us a presentation on capturing sand and vegetative plantings, those wind-driven sands on our barrier islands, and talk about how we create dunes and why they are the shape that they are. Next slide. So if any of the events that are going on in the future, you can go to the CPRA webpage. That's at coastal.la.gov. On the right side of the screen that you come to, calendars are there. You can click on calendars. It'll give you the list of events to come. If you want to register for the Coastal Connect, the business event that's Monday at the Center for River Studies, you can go to louisianactac.org and all the information on how to register will be there. Next slide. So we are live today. So if you are watching and you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you want to share thoughts with us, you can send us an email at coastal@la.gov. We'd love to hear from you and try to answer your questions. If we get so many questions, we're not able to answer them today during the hour that we have for this, we'll shoot you an email afterwards and do our best to respond. Bern, if you want to go ahead and get your presentation loaded up. As I mentioned earlier this week, we've just got a dream team of presenters that are bringing great information to you. So today, Bern Wood from our Lafayette office and Natalie Mathern from our New Orleans office are going to talk a little bit about landscaping a better coast using terraces as a restoration tool. So Bern, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for that great introduction and information on all the activities that are going on. It's pretty exciting stuff. And so, as Greg mentioned, my name is Bernard Wood. I'm with the Lafayette Regional Office. And today, myself and Natalie Mathern from the New Orleans Regional Office are going to be talking about landscaping a better coast using terraces as a restoration tool. And it's kind of the field of dreams MO, right? If you build it, they will come. And they being all the flora and fauna that use our coastal marshes. And so we're attempting to turn open water into these rich ecosystems. And you can think of a terrace not like this. This is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about your Manhattan Sweet Terrace, a lanai, or a veranda. We're talking about this. So these are terrace fields that are sediment placed from in situ soil on the landscape, and they have different purposes. In some cases, their job is to retain sediment, and in other cases, it's more to harbor wildlife and ecosystem services. So in these examples, you see the terrace field at TV12 along the central coast of Little Vermilion Bay. And that guy's positioned where a bunch of sediment comes off the landscape, and it's designed to trap sediment, but also sustain wildlife and perform those marsh ecological services that we're all tied to as coastal residents. And then the other one you see is a terrace field that's pre-Quipra. So this thing's been out there for 35 years in the landscape, and it's expanded through time due to mostly tidal sediment trapping, even though that was not its intended purpose, and also storm surge overwash sedimentation. And so these things are extremely effective from a cost standpoint at producing wildlife and performing the services that we all need out of our coastal zone. So some general terrace benefits, which I just talked about a lot of them, but I'll reiterate. You have habitat creation along with wind fetch and tidal force reduction. You have habitat both in the lower elevation intertidal zone, which is basically the toe of the terrace, and then you have higher supertidal areas that are constructed side by side at a relatively low project cost, and that's kind of the key to this method. So this provides edge habitat for species of economic and ecological importance, such as everything that we know about: shrimp, crabs, game fish, waterfowl, wading birds, alligators, etc. And then on the slightly higher elevation, or the crown of the terrace, this offers rest, refuge, forage, and nesting opportunities for coastal animals, including neotropical migrants, shorebirds, waterfowl, fur bearers, alligators, deer. I mean, these lists for both of these go on as long as you want to sit there and talk about them, if you're talking about all the animals and plants that use this habitat once we create it. And so this is a good example of what a terrace looks like up close and personal. You can see the ridge down the middle of it is higher woody vegetation that's going to be used for rest and nesting and forage. And then the perimeter, or the water-land interface, the shoreline basically, is what we're creating. You see that emergent marsh, and that's where the shrimp, crabs, fish, nursery grounds are. And so these act as part of the larger coastal processes, or they interact with the larger coastal processes to reduce wind and wake fetch. They dampen tidal forces, as we mentioned. This slows water down and increases clarity, and what that does is cause submerged aquatic vegetation to thrive. And so in the water around this terrace, the sediment will fall out of suspension, the water, and then this attracts a whole nother suite of organisms to the previously open water habitat, which would have been significantly more barren. And these effects can also protect local marshes, protect shoreline, they can protect infrastructure from damage over the lifetime of the project. Sometimes this is at the expense of the terrace itself, depending on the soil properties and location. The terraces will erode. But in areas where sediment is readily available, that process is not part of the equation. And so where you have terraces and sediment together, that's a synergistic effect that we're trying to work toward, right? We're trying to have this small project footprint with a passive approach that grows land without direct placement of dedicated dredging material. And so here we're looking at a relatively new project, CS49 in Cameron Creel watershed. It's a large hydrologic restoration project, but also has a large terrace field component on it, which you can see here. And nutrient-rich water out of the GIWW that's also sediment-laden comes through a structure that's a one-way structure down this canal and bifurcates out into this terrace field. And it's been very dramatic in just a couple of years that this project has been on the landscape. This is what these terraces looked like when they were constructed at like year 1. Year 3 or 4 from post-construction, the vegetation now is 40, 50 feet or further in some cases out into the open water. And so we're building marsh out beyond the original footprint of the terrace due to sedimentation and nutrient availability. And so it's been extremely productive and a successful project at this point. And so like our whole goal with all of these projects is to engineer with nature. We're trying to produce efficiencies. These projects use strategically placed in situ soil, as I mentioned, to enhance the deposition and retention of sediment through time. We're using the natural processes. These things are designed to retain riverine and tidally deposited sediment in concert with sound engineering principles to promote land building. And also some storm surge sediment deposition takes place in these, everything is in the coastal zone. And so during tropical events, they also trap sediment from those sources. So we're trying to broaden benefits. These projects create and enhance wetland habitat for fish and birds and other animals, as I mentioned, and this simultaneously builds land. So it's really a win-win all the way around, while also protecting infrastructure and shorelines. And you can see in this picture, here we have the Natalie, what's the project? BS11? Yeah, BS11 project, thank you. In 2012 and then 2019, and you can see the dramatic changes in this landscape just due to the positioning of correctly designed and engineered terrace field. You can see how much land is being built in the area with no direct sediment input. And so all these projects promote collaboration, right? These are all projects that are collaborations, but a lot of them with QIPRA and their federal sponsors, NRCS, NIMPS, US Fish, EPA, the Corps, obviously CPRA, NGOs, local governments, and landowners. And all of this increases project success and leverages additional project funds. And so that's kind of the pillars upon which all these designs work. And so the natural processes, you've probably seen this on a few of the other presentations this week, but historically during periods of high river flooding, the deposit of bedload sediment further out into the distributionary channel mouth is one of the events that takes place with high flow. And then what that does is slow water down, force water out laterally through crevasse splays, and that expands the three-dimensional framework of the river delta into shallow open water. And so these heavy sediments form an obstruction that slows the water down, allows the finer sediment to fall out of suspension. Emergent vegetation also assists with that, and this creates new land. And if you're not familiar with what this image is, that's the Wax Lake Delta, and the Wax Lake outlet was built in 1942 as flood relief for Morgan City from the Mississippi River, or from the Atchafalaya River. And it didn't really become subaerial or visual above water until, I think, 1973. There was a big Mississippi River flood. And since that period of time, since 1973, it's expanded 7 to 8 miles out into Atchafalaya Bay. And it's pretty crazy. And a good blueprint for success. But so we're trying to do all this with anthropogenic assistance, right? We're trying to find specific areas where we can have minimal invasive projects that deliver a lot more sediment than they cost, basically. And so the coast of Louisiana, as we all know, is heavily engineered for work and flood protection, and the natural processes have been interrupted. But with dedicated terrace construction, we can achieve the same goals. And you've probably already seen this slide also, maybe in some of the other talks. We've done this at numerous locations, as I mentioned. The Atchafalaya River Delta, Mississippi River Delta, Acadiana Bays, other areas off the GIWW. And so what this does is it slows down sediment-laden water, allowing for the backfilling of previously open water, which ultimately creates vegetated marsh or swamp without the expense of dedicated dredging. And this works through either terrace construction, or you can place maintenance dredge out into the water body to slow it down. Both of those happened in this instance. West Bay diversion, where originally in 2011-ish they built some terrace-like devices that slowed the water down, and as that started to backfill around, I guess, 2015 period, they put some further south, and then that increased sediment deposition all along the Mississippi River channel. And you can see its connection in purple on those lower panes. So terrace construction. They're usually small independent spoil islands that are placed within an engineered pattern, density, height, and slope to meet locally specific soil conditions, hydrology regimes, and project goals. So as we've already seen through some of the slides, they're very specific. They're engineered and tailored to the specific location, application, and goal for the project. And the soil is typically sourced on-site from borrow pits that are excavated adjacent to the terrace. And then initially that will create a sediment deficit through compaction and loss to the water column during construction. But in an environment with readily available sediment source, this deficit is quickly rectified, and then vertical accretion of the water bottom begins. This is typically first presents itself as expansive mud flats at low tide or during winter cold fronts. And this schematic here is basically a design of what a typical terrace section would look like. You have a borrow pit. An excavator sits between the borrow pit and the terrace being constructed. It removes material from the water bottom, places it to the elevation and slope that is in the engineering design specs, and you repeat that process to whatever size and shape the terrace field will end up becoming. And so this is what that looks like from the air. It's not actually a terrace, it's a containment dike, but it's very similar. And this also is something I would like to potentially explore moving forward, is using larger terrace structures more in the coastal fringe marsh to where we could try and harness storm deposition as a potential sediment source, right? We're trapping mostly riverine sediments with these terrace fields, either large-scale Mississippi River chaffle or small-scale Mermentau and Vermilion River, but storm surge sediment trapping might also be something we should be looking at. So once these terrace fields are on the landscape, it's typically a pretty long march toward land that's difficult to predict. And I think Natalie will get into some more of that later. But after initial construction, vegetation can be elusive in land formation. But as that process slows down the water, it creates land gains, and then it forces the water to find alternate paths to lower elevation. During these flooding conditions, sediment-laden water still flows across the terrace field, but when the vegetation starts to emerge, that friction can cause rapid marsh building and really go from seeming like kind of a minimally vegetated mudflat to an intact marsh in one season. Like this picture is of TV12 between the terraces, and so vegetation was planted on the mudflat, and through a couple of river flooding years of the Vermilion River, it deposited all this material that fell out of suspension when it interacted with the vegetation and caused marsh platform to form in between the terraces with no direct sediment input. So the terraces are often planted also to expedite vegetation cover and stabilize the newly placed sediment. So these are typical shots of what you see around terrace fields at or after construction. So the panel on my right is BS11, and you can see Spartina alterniflora planted around the toe, and that's to stabilize that newly placed soil against erosion. And then on the left, you see Little Vermilion Bay, which is between the terraces, and these expansive mud flats were forming, but little vegetation was emerging, so they were planted, and then that really expedited the process. So we'll do a quick overview of a few of the Lafayette Regional Office's small terracing projects, and then we'll switch over, like I mentioned, to Natalie and Fort St. Phillips. And she's kind of going to do a case study and have a data-rich examination of Fort St. Phillips. But the Vermilion Bay overview, so if you're not familiar, Lafayette is due north of these water bodies. You have Vermilion Bay, Wesco Blanche Bay, the GIWW are kind of the main features. And you can see how sediment laden this water is, and that's not an uncommon thing because you have the Chaffalaya River coming down the Wax Lake outlet and interacting with the GIWW, and also wrapping around the point and coming into Wesco Blanche Bay. And then you also have Vermilion River drainage into Vermilion Bay, which drains a lot of the Acadiana Prairie and agricultural settings around Lafayette, so you get a lot of non-point source runoff. So you can see here in this photo, this is actually in one of the terrace fields. This is in TV12, I believe, and I mean, this is an apex predator, and it's living in the terrace field, so that tells you that the food web and the ecological services that these terraces are providing are very similar, if not exactly the same as natural marshes. So like I mentioned, we have several small-scale sediment trapping projects in the Teche Vermilion Basin. They're positioned where riverine sediments pour into open water that's typically about 3 to 4, maybe 5 feet deep. And so these projects are designed to trap that closer to shore and accumulate and build land as opposed to just being flushed out through repeated tidal and flood cycles into the Gulf of Mexico. These three locations, which use different sediment sources and are slightly different ages post-construction, all tell a similar story. And all of these projects are closed out now. So these were older Quipper projects that have ended their 20-year economic life, but are still functioning as designed and appear to be doing so going forward. And so it's really a testament to some dollars well spent. So this is TV-15, the Jaws. This picture is of a satellite image taken in January of this year. So this project's closed out. Luckily, it doesn't know it because it's still collecting sediment, supporting marsh, growing fish and wildlife, and locals love it for its fishing and hunting opportunities. But these projects all quickly became shallow mudflats in open water, and the borrow pits from construction filled in mostly. Some of them actually became connected for conveyance channels, just as water seeks a way to find the lowest elevation. And then as you build these mudflats, it's going to cut around and through in whatever way is the most efficient. But after those mudflats formed, maybe 2 or 3 years post-construction, we had a period of stasis that went on for 5-6 years where there was spotty, random clumps of vegetation, but that had all kind of been washed in with the root system in place during storms, but not from seed sets. And so it's kind of frustrating to watch this take place when you feel the potential of this large area that's now a big mudflat. And here's what that project looked like kind of 4 years post-construction, pretty sparsely vegetated, and then at year 20 where it looks like Wax Lake Delta splay. You know, it's got all this vegetation, woody vegetation, emergent marsh vegetation, submerged aquatic vegetation, floating vegetation. Every bit of that is supporting the food chain, growing fish, shrimp, alligators, ducks, all the things that we're kind of interested in. So the decision to plant these inter-terrace areas, Quippa's LA39 project, which is coastwide planting, was started to identify areas that could benefit from vegetative planting, either as a recovery tool or as an enhancement technique. And all three of these projects, TV12, TV15, and TV18, were all planted at various times with various levels of success with site-specific planting regimes. And what you see here is TV12 in Little Vermilion Bay, immediately post-construction in 2003, and then you see it in 2024 after it's closed out. So again, luckily it doesn't know it's closed out because all these inter-terrace areas are filling in with marsh vegetation, and you're forming an extremely productive ecosystem as like the water interfaces with the land, and all these little niches are created. And as you can see in the panel to the right, the terrace field was originally much larger, and then as erosion, wave, and wake energy slowly chewed this thing up, it became more compact. And so potentially armoring the perimeter of this terrace field would have increased benefits and increased the life of the project, but that also comes at increased cost. So it's not necessarily a no-brainer because, like I said, it's been on the landscape for now 22 years or so. And what that looks like on the ground is the panel to the right. You have the terrace in the background, vegetative planting a little bit off of the terrace. That's California bullwhip, Chenoplectus californicus. And then you can see in between the two, the water is filled with submerged aquatic vegetation, in this case, Vallisneria, and also floating aquatics. Unfortunately, hyacinth rafting is a big problem in some of these areas just because of the nutrients can cause them to really explode at different times of the year. But when you remember the panel that we looked at for Vermilion Bay, how muddy it was, having water clear enough to support huge rafts of submerged aquatic vegetation, which is an incredible nursery ground for fish and shrimp, is a pretty phenomenal feat. And when I first went out there and saw these huge beds, I was really surprised. And then if you look at the panel on the left, this is TV-18 about 4 years after construction. And the interesting thing about this land water image, the terraces are in green, the mud flats that formed are this kind of tannish brown color. But the water pretty quickly after mudflat formation stopped following like a sinuous path through the terrace field that was part of the original design and cut straight paths, seeking the path of least resistance. And so the Vermilion River cutoff is just to the northeast of this project. And during high flooding, water is cutting through that terrace field, kind of circumventing it. But when the tide is high and the river is high, then it flows over it and you still gain sedimentation. So the general response to planting is extremely successful right off the bat, but it also has its problems with either hurricane damage or rafting of aquatic vegetation, floating aquatic vegetation, like I mentioned, just like every natural marsh does too in a fresh, turbid environment. But in a lot of cases, what this led to was marsh platform creation and the introduction of multiple pioneer species. And together, these terrace designs, sediment availability, and vegetative planting have synergistically enhanced previously open bay bottoms to a thriving marsh. And what that looks like, kind of in a quick time lapse, is this is TV-12 over a 4-year period. And on the left, you see it as soon as the plugs were planted, so that's basically immediately post-planting. Then 2 years later, they've turned into these giant hedgerows that kind of look like bamboo, but that's California bullwhip, probably like 12 feet tall, just because of how rich the soil and the water column is with nutrients. And then as you move to 4 years post-planting, you can see that the area now acts like its own terrace field. It's gained elevation, it's gained other species diversity with no direct sediment input or any other kind of management other than planting. And so that's a really powerful tool in the coastal tool belt. And so this is another shot of the Jaws TV-15. Looks just like a point bar in the Wax Lake Delta because it shares the same hydrology. And so with habitat creation and expansion in formerly open water environments with no direct sediment input, that's the key takeaway. Designed, engineered, and constructed to succeed. And they have with some minimal adaptive management. And with that, we're going to cue it up for Natalie Mathern from New Orleans and her case study of BS11.
Hi, thank you. I'm Natalie. I'm from the New Orleans office. I'll be giving a quick overview of our BS11 project. So the BS11 project, or the Delta Management at Fort St. Philip, I'll just be referring to it as BS11. The reason this project is so notable is because it is our first CRIPR project to combine marsh terracing with an artificial crevasse feature. This project is located on the east bank of the Mississippi River and near the remains of the Fort St. Philip. This project includes 2 sub-areas within this region that's located on the map. And the reason this project was chosen for restoration was because a natural crevasse formed in 1973, which led to a net loss of land in the area due to physical scouring, resource subsidence, and storm effect. And as you can see from the map, the area is also cut up by channels and canals, which led to a natural alteration of the sediment distribution, leading to a lot of sediment to bypass the marsh and go out into further out into the Red Sound Basin. So to address this issue, the BS11 project proposed to cut 6 artificial crevasses. This was done by dredging canals through the spoil banks, allowing water and sediment to enter into the sediment-starved marshes. Crevasse 1A, which is shown on the map, was constructed to direct water and sediment into the shallow open water near Bay Denise. And in addition to having this crevasse, a terrace field was constructed within this receiving bay to help directly create marsh habitat by enhancing sediment retention and reducing wave activity within the basin. So construction for this project took about 6 months, and it was constructed in 2006. It cost approximately $1.38 million. And in this Google Earth imagery from November 2006, you can see the marsh buggy finishing up construction on these terraces. The terraces were constructed using in-suit material, which is material from within the site. This created an initial sediment deficit of the area. And in the image, you can clearly see the borrow pits and then our built-up terrace fields. In total, 98 terraces were constructed, each about 200 feet long, and for a total of about 19,000 linear feet of terraces. So at construction, the slopes of the terraces were vegetated with 2 plants, Spartina alterniflora and Pasiphaeum vaginatum, to help stabilize the terraces and promote more veg establishment. And so to evaluate the performance of this project over its 20-year lifespan, several different data types were collected throughout the project study. These included RTK elevation surveys, land water analysis using aerial imagery, and different vegetation sampling dates throughout the project period. So in addition, CRIMS 139 is a nearby CRIMS site, and that was used as supplementary information to help compare a more natural marsh to the area. At this CRIMS site, we have different data sets that were collected, including sediment accretion, surface elevation, water level, salinity, and of course, vegetation composition. And so one way to evaluate marsh development is by looking at the inundation levels, which is how often the marsh surface is flooded. And so for fresh intermediate marshes, the optimal flooding range generally falls between 10% and 90% inundation. And for receiving bay 1A, where the terrace field was located, enough sediment has accumulated in this area to help it move out of the greater than 90% inundation range, as shown in the red, and into conditions that are more suitable for marsh vegetation to establish. Another impact that impacts this project area is the Mississippi River. Over the past several years, river levels have played a major role in sediment delivery to artificial crevasse projects like BS11. And in the year prior to the year 10 survey, river stages remained above the long-term mean, resulting in significant sediment deposition within the area. However, much of the sediment remained loosely compacted, and so when we had those higher river events of 2019 and 2020 occur, the increased water level increased erosion and land loss in some areas. And so successful crevasses system depends on a delicate balance between water flow, sediment, and vegetation growth. And too much or too little of either of these can influence land build and marsh growth. And so looking now at our land water results from sub-area 1, the brown areas represent our vegetated emergent land, and the blue areas represent our unvegetated mudflats, which we'll refer to as water. And immediately after construction, the area contained about 25% land, which increased to 38% land in 2013 in our year 7 survey. In 2017, we had 57% land, and then in 2021, we went to 43% land. So in 2021, we do see a percent drop to 43%. And this was because this was around the time of our high river levels that I mentioned earlier in the previous slides. We had the highest river levels since 2002. And this high river levels caused a lot of scouring and erosion in this area. And also in our year 11 survey, we might have had a slight overestimate occur due to ample presence of aquatic vegetation in the area. Usually this aquatic vegetation is classified as water, but we could have had some areas misclassified as land, leading to a higher estimate of land in that year. But even accounting for all the scouring and the overestimate, the 2021 value of 43% is still represents an increase from both the as-built survey and the 2013 survey. So for focusing specifically on our terrace fields, it's important to remember that this area was completely open water prior to 2006. And then following the as-built survey in 2006, the terrace field alone contributed 18 acres of land in the area. By year 7, initial 6 acres have formed as the borrow pits began to fill in with sediment. And then in 2017, we had reported acreage of 63 acres, but this value was once again likely influenced by some of that floating aquatic vegetation. And then by 2021, the field contained about 42 acres of land. This was once again impacted by those high river stages and scouring in this area. But overall, the terrace fields are still building land, representing a net gain of about 24 acres compared to the as-built conditions in 2006. So to give a more clear visual example, these images show the terrace fields throughout time. This first image in 2006 was the just after construction. The terrace and adjacent borrow pits are clearly visible. And then in 2014, we can see these borrow pits begin to fill in and early indications of early marsh development occurring. And then in 2019, we see large amounts of floating aquatic vegetation and much more infilling in the area as well. And then for 2026, it is zoomed out more, but it's a great way to show all the sediment that is still flowing in the area and just how the project is holding up over time. So looking at the elevations, we see several interesting trends appear. Mean elevation shown by the solid line increase from 2002 to 2006, followed by a slight decrease in 2022. In contrast, the maximum elevation observed, shown by the dotted line, continued to increase over time, with a notable jump actually between 2016 and 2022. So together, these trends suggest that the field may be transitioning from more loosely deposited sediment to more compact material. And then rather than having widespread erosion, the changes likely reflect sediment consolidation and redistributing, with localized areas continuing to accumulate sediment. And so this figure is our elevation profile collected along a transect running perpendicular to our terrace field as represented by the arrow. And just to break down this graph a little bit, our red line represents our pre-construction 2002 conditions where it was just a flat open bay. So the line is just flat, no elevation there. And then you see our light blue line as the as-built conditions in 2006. As you see, there's a lot of variation here because we have our terrace peaks and then our borrow pits as our lower points. And then in 2011, shown in green, we see the flattening of these terrace peaks and infilling of these borrow pits. And then in 2016, we see those high elevation gains likely associated with high river levels. And then in 2022, we see that dark blue line continuing to show marsh leveling and redistribution of sediment across the terrace fields. So this figure helps compare the mean elevation of the terrace field to the other receiving bays within the same project. And this terrace field shown in the bold green started at the lowest elevation in 2002, but it quickly increased and eventually matched or exceeded the other surrounding receiving bays in the area. The only exception being Receiving Bay 2B, which started at just a naturally higher elevation than the other areas. So this once again demonstrates how terrace fields can enhance sediment trapping and accelerate elevation gain compared to open receiving bays without terrace fields. So switching to our vegetation results, vegetation sampling within the terraces helped provide us with information on stability and health of the marsh. And after just one growing season, we saw significant vegetation growth within the area with a mean percent coverage of 85% in 2007. And vegetation cover remained high throughout the whole project, reaching about 90% mean cover by 2021. The species composition did change over time. In 2007, the dominant species were the Spartina alterniflora and the Paspalum vaginatum, that were the planted species, along with Echinocloa and Vigna. And by 2021, the dominant species has shifted to Cochlea or taro, which is an invasive species, but it is a similar composition. It has a similar species composition to the nearby Krim site, showing that this species has established throughout the delta. And despite this shift, the terrace has remained densely vegetated throughout the years. As shown in these pictures here, we have our first picture in 2016, and then our follow-up picture in 2021. And so just to have a comparison with the other receiving bays for vegetation, so significant vegetation did not occur in the other receiving bays until year 5 and 10. And one of the most common species observed was Sagittaria platyphilia. And receiving bay 1A and alt 1A were initially selected for our vegetation sampling at year 5 and 10, but we did not see significant vegetation until year 10. So this once again highlights how the terraces provided a substantial head start for marsh development and allowing vegetation to establish years earlier than nearby areas. So the success of BS11 inspired other projects in the area nearby. The Bay Denise Delta Management Project was a joint effort by the Wildlife Department and Ducks Unlimited, and the goal was to store 2,500 acres of marsh. Following a similar idea for BS11, crevices were cut and terrace-like structures were constructed, and overall the project has been doing really great. And so in conclusion, it's important to remember that predicting land gain is inherently difficult and challenging because of factors like river discharge, storms, and other factors can impact it significantly over time. But the BS11 project demonstrates how combining marsh terracing with artificial crevasses can enhance land building and increase marsh habitat. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Fantastic presentation, Natalie and Bern. You guys just rocked it. Great job. We do have a couple of questions, and so let me follow up with those. Natalie, first, the BS11 project, the Fort St. Philip project that a good friend of mine, Mr. Ralph Lieberstadt, was the project manager on, and I know Ralph would be really proud to hear your presentation today. How does that project compare to other natural crevasses?
So with other natural crevasses, it's hard to plan and really dictate how much sediment is flowing through the areas. So when we have a planned project like this, we can more impact areas that need the most help.
Fantastic. As part of the design and engineering process.
Of design and engineering.
Excellent. Great answer. Great presentation. Bern, I've got a presentation, but let me set it up a little bit for you. So yesterday, Brian Gossman talked about a project, crevasse projects that first started in the 1980s. Our friends at Wildlife and Fisheries built some of those in the early days of restoration over on the Plaquemines Parish, the toe of the boot. Today, we talked about some of the earliest projects at the Sabine National Wildlife Refuge. I think about the same time, 1986 or so. The very first project from a terrace standpoint over in the heel of the boot. Cameron Parish, and you showed projects in Vermilion, I think St. Mary, other terrace projects. Terracing has probably been the most replicated project type we've had. You talked about NGOs and private landowners have built them. I've seen our friends over in Texas have been copying us and doing really great work over there. I'm sure it's all over the place. So as we look forward, how can we expand on this? It's not only a cost-effective technique, but it's ecologically, it's really effective. How can we expand on this technique moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great setup and a great question. I would, like I mentioned in the previous discussion, I would like to see us try to implement this more on the fringe marsh, like the salt marsh fringe Gulf interface, with maybe some larger and armored terrace-like structures to see if we can start to harness hurricanes and tropical storms, which we know are deleterious effects on the coastal marshes, but they also can bring huge swaths of sediment in with them or retain the sediment that they dislodge as they leave the area and water pours off the coast and out onto the continental shelf. So engineering and design, I would like to see if there's some locations that are feasible for that kind of sediment trapping, not just the riverine ones that we've shown to be extremely successful and replicable, like you're saying. I mean, the price to get into those type of terraces is smaller, and landowners even are doing it of their own accord just because of the ecosystem services they provide.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody tuning in today. Tomorrow, day 5 of the presentations, again, we've got batting cleanup for us, Elizabeth Gerald from our New Orleans field office and Darren Lee from our Lafayette field office. If you've enjoyed these presentations, shoot us an email. Give us thoughts. Next year, what would you like topics to be presented on? Thank you very much and have a great day.